Hi, guys. Hey, Ted. So this has been a fun little trip for me, to try to parachuting into your world, and I really had a lot of fun listening, and I'm going to take a few minutes to walk you through something kind of weird in mine, all right? We're going to call it Story Tracker. What is it? Well, first, who the heck am I? My name is Ben Welsh. I sometimes go by Pale Wire online. I'm originally from Eastern Iowa, and at one point in my life, I was a student here at Mizzou, and I've had a real fun time the last couple days coming back to check in on everything. And I'm pleased to see Jesse Hall's still there. The J School's gotten bigger. There's a thing now called Alley A that I've learned about, which is pretty exciting. And I'm now discovered I've turned into that old crank who leads his wife around his college campus and is like, you know, things just ain't what they used to be. And that's so it's been fun for me the last couple of days to grow in that way. And also my day job is in Los Angeles, where I work at the LA Times. And I'm one of those nerds in the newsroom who does a little bit of computer programming, a little bit of writing, and tries to take data and flip it around and do stuff with it to make news, right? Or to make stories happen, to make web applications happen, to make graphics, to do stuff with data, right? And so that means that I do a lot of computer programming, which I started to learn here at Mizzou, thanks to Irie Nykar and their program there, which I would really recommend. And one thing I've always loved about newspapers since I was a really little kid is big blowout front pages, right? Who doesn't love them? And here's one of the most famous ones in LA Times history. And when you talk about archiving this story, you know, in the database it might go into, and the metadata, and all the things that we're discussing at this conference, right? You can easily imagine what would go into the database. There's a headline, there's a pub date, there's a byline, there's the big blob of text. That it is everything that went into the story. But one thing that sometimes isn't captured, or that is sort of the intangible thing, or the thing that isn't always in the metadata that's really powerful about this front page, is the design, right? It's the layout. It's the big block headline. It's the context of knowing that's not normally what the front page looked like, which is sort of an unwritten part of the design that's in there as well. And that's something that's just special about newspapers, right? And that's why we love these big front pages like that. And, you know, I work on the website, and I'm a computer nerd, and I think sometimes that's often true about news homepages in the same way. That in a homepage is embedded a design that is part of the message, right? In that layout of how the page is done. And I really started thinking when the Egypt thing was happening a couple years ago, and everybody was doing these big crazy homepages to try to communicate to Americans what a big deal this thing was that was going on over in Egypt, that wow, I don't think that part of news presentation online is necessarily all that well captured. And I started really thinking about it, and I took a bunch of screenshots myself just by hand with a little drag and drop just for fun. And I started thinking back to another event, which is one of my favorite news homepages from a couple years before. Do you guys remember Balloon Boy? Yeah. This was the hoax news story in Colorado about Falcon had supposedly lifted off air. And I was having a bad day at work that day. You know, I was kind of down, and then this happened, and it really brought my spirits back up. And so I'd taken this screenshot at the time. But when the Egypt thing happened, and I was really kind of thinking about, are we saving this stuff? I went to the Internet Archive, which is one of my favorite sites, and which I direct every investigative reporter I work with to dig stuff up all the time. I said, I wonder if they captured Balloon Boy, because it was such a great moment for me. And it wasn't there. And, you know, it's not any fault of theirs. They have this big, broad mission, the entire goddamn internet. You know what I mean? They can't get everything. And to catch every little thing, especially the fun screw-ups on a news homepage, you'd have to be hitting that thing all the time, right? Because these things are changing more and more. And if any of you work at a newspaper website, you know that there's pressure to get that thing just churning. Because you want people who come back to feel like they're getting something fresh. You want to trick the search engines into thinking you got, you know, fancy fresh news by putting it there because they weight it. And there's a whole game that goes on in newsrooms to keep that thing moving. I just started thinking, I wonder if we could watch that or track that. And since I'm a computer nerd, I decided to try to write some code to do it. And I made a website. The website's called passpages.org, and Edward explained it a little. Every hour, it goes to about 100 news homepages all around the world, and it just takes a picture. All it does is the server, which just has a little web browser inside of it, and it fires it up, it waits for it to load, it takes a picture and it saves it. I said, so it can be done. Even I can do it, right? In my own crappy code and my crappy website, which I then put all up online. And that was kind of fun. That was like a fun weekend. I had hacked this thing that did something. That was cool. But then the bill came. I was kind of, well, how am I going to pay for this? Or even should I pay for it? And is it worth saving or keeping? Does anybody want it? Like, I don't know. But I knew I wanted to make the point that we should be saving these home pages because they carry really important editorial decisions that reflect the hierarchy and the choices made by news gatekeepers, and I didn't think they were getting saved often enough. So I did a Kickstarter, and I really did not think I'd raise any money, right? I just figured this is going to be so I can tweet it out and make a bunch of noise and be like, we should be doing this, right? And then I got shocked to actually raise the money. So I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do, right? And so the money paid to keep the website up for a little while longer, and I tried to start talking to different people and figuring out, well, is this something we should do or not do, or what have I stumbled into? And in that course, I ended up talking to some people here at the Reynolds Journalism Institute, Randy and Edward, just about like, hey, what do you guys think of this? You have this new archiving mission. Does this fit what you want to do? And they were like, yeah, maybe, sure. Let's try something, right? You know, and so what we tried is what I'm here today to unveil, which is a new, well, let me back up, sorry. So the screenshots are good, right? So when you take a picture, and this is from past pages, it looks good, right? But it's just like a flat, stupid image, right? It's like a, you know, and you can't, the data inside of it is just all kind of flat, and you can't really parse it out very well, right? But of course, inside the web page is the HTML, right? Which contains all of the layout and code. There's that big headline right there is that H1 tag right there, right? And there's these style files that kind of do all that layout and make it happen. And we quickly realized in our conversations, if we really want to analyze what the choices are and what's going on, we got to get beyond the image. We got to be able to get into that data that's the HTML, like they do at the Internet Archive, and start to analyze that. And so we came up with this new idea, Story Tracker, which is really kind of an experiment, and it's hitting sort of version 1.0 today, where I'm going to show you some of the features. We're going to talk about what it does, what we're trying to do, and then you can tell me what sucks about it and how we can make it better. Okay, so that's going to be the rest of my spiel. So, as of today, you can go to your terminal, and there's going to be code, guys, just a little. And I think I'm the first one to show code, which I always love. I'm really proud of that. So if you were to go to your computer terminal, this is going to be in the Python programming language, which is not as scary as it sounds. And you could just, with one command, install our friend Story Tracker, right? And then once you have it installed, it's just a simple library that takes some of these tasks and things we want to do and tries to make them easy. So the first thing it does is just a really simple archival system. You know, before we can analyze the HTML on the page, we got to download it, we got to save it, we got to put it in a place we can do. So with one little command like this, you can download any page, not even a home page, really any page, right? It'll archive it in a structured way, zip it up, and save it. So St. Louis Post-Dispatch, right? This is going to be our example from a couple days ago. This was their home page. And then it has code that it's then going to fire up the HTML inside the system and extract all of the hyperlinks that appear on the page. So you're able to take out of any of the home page, zip out all the hyperlinks, and dump those to a spreadsheet. But it doesn't just take the hyperlinks out, which really any parser can do. That's really pretty elementary parsing thing. Like, here's the URL, here's the headline that was inside of it, right? That's pretty easy to do. But what we're also doing is the code is leveraging some browser simulators to actually fire up and render the page, just like the image does, right? And pull out where it is on the page. So where did this link appear? How big was the font? What box is around it, right? Does it jump to a story? Or does it jump to a section front or an advertisement or something the system estimates not to be a story? So in addition to parsing it, it's going to pull out all this other metadata about the layout on the page, the treatment and prominence it's given, and then whether it's not it's a story. And then that gives you then structured data that will allow you to analyze how the page was laid out in a way that's a little more sophisticated, right? And so that is kind of the intel inside of the code that we've made. And then what's coming next is the sort of some basic examples of what you can start doing once you get there. So the first thing you can do is you can highlight where the stories are and stories aren't, right? And you can overlay on top of a page, or really anywhere you wanted, where these stories are. And that's what we kind of pulled out, and it just will create an image like this for you on the fly. And then you can take multiple screenshots and start to like automatically make an animated GIF, just like of cats or of anything else on the internet, right? That's showing those changes over time on the page. So one line of code, boom, you got it, right? Then you can say even track an individual story over time and see how it moves down across the page. And that's not just something you can spit out as an image. You can then also extract that data and automate analysis of the quantitative data that comes with it, right? In addition to visualizing it. And that is what really gets me excited. It's, you know, beyond making a goofy little GIF, you can start to run this at really large databases of home pages and ask some interesting questions. So I did a little case study, right? And our case study today of what you could do with something like this is one of my favorite websites, of course, the Drudge Report. Does everybody know the Drudge Report? I think you probably do. The key thing to know about it for this example is that it doesn't write very much original news. It's mostly links to other third-party sources, but it's such a popular aggregator homepage that many, many people come here and click on this. So the selections they make has a large influence on media stories that get attention, right? And that leads me to, and also Past Pages archives that every hour. Not just the screenshot, but now thanks to Story Tracker, for several months, it's also been archiving the HTML. And so we can lean on that database that we've created of archived things over the last couple months and ask and answer a question, right? And this is what gets me excited, because when I was a graduate student at Mizzou, I had to do a content analysis, right, to earn my master's degree. And that involves studying newspaper coverage of political candidates. And I was so boneheaded at the time, I literally went through and counted them like by hand, right? And it took me a week to do all the bean counting necessary to run a story to answer a question like, who did Matt Drudge say linked to the most? But when you have that all automated and you're able to quickly run through it, you can answer that question. I literally did this case study in about 30 minutes on Saturday afternoon, because the data's there, the code's there that's able to run through and do it. So you just kind of piece it together and you slap it out. So November 4th was the election, right? The midterm election, big day for Matt Drudge, right? Our study is going to take the previous 7 days of home pages of the Drudge Report for that period. And in there's 97 archives that were taken down by the Past Pages system. I fed those into Story Tracker, had it extract all of the unique URLs that ever appeared in a home page, because it doesn't necessarily change all that much from hour to hour, but over time you're going to have quite a bit of turnover of the links. So 953 distinct links appeared on the page in that period. Now, if you've used the Drudge Report, you know that the bottom half of the page is just a bunch of filler, right? It's the same links to the same people that never change. Doing an analysis, so for do any meaningful analysis, you have to be able to subtract out which ones are stories and which one aren't. Guess what? Story Tracker does that for you, right? With the estimation we do based on the URL of what's not a story. So of those 953 links, 448 are estimated to actually go to news stories distinct links, right? And of those, there's 142 different news domains. So over a 7-day period prior to the election, Matt Drudge linked to about 142 different news sources. But who got the most links? Any guesses? Okay, Washington Post is one guess. Fox News, okay. CNN, okay. AP. I love this. This is like my, all right. Well, let's see. So let's do the countdown. Number 10, number 9, USA Today, right? Followed by thehill.com, believe it or not, which does a lot of coverage of what's happening in Washington. There's a tie. Followed by a 3-way tie between Politico and 2 British tabloidy newspapers, right? Maybe surprising. Number 4, the New York Times. Didn't do so hot. Number 3 is the Washington Times, right-wing paper in D.C. And then we actually have a tie for first place between the Washington Post and, believe it or not, Breitbart.com, which people who, if you guys know what that is, Breitbart.com was a new startup founded by a former person who worked at the Drudge Report, and they have connections, and so they get lots of links, which is something you can't really prove or know until you quantify it in this way. So this is not some amazing, awesome study that proves anything, but it just shows that when you're able to automate your analysis of those types of choices, you can really quickly start to ask and answer interesting questions. You know what I mean? You could also ask, hey, show me every photo of Michelle Obama Matt Drudge has ever run. Might be a thing that you could also extract, right? Which I think would be a very interesting photo gallery. Or you could compare how often different entities or terms appeared on different news homepages of different outlets. You could say, how was Ferguson covered by certain newspapers or broadcast websites compared to print ones? You could start to really kind of put together a more complex analysis of what type of media coverage there is, right? And so this Drudge analysis I did was, again, about a half-hour work. The code's also up on GitHub along with the rest of the past pages stuff and Story Tracker if you're interested. And back again to our friends at the Wayback Machine. So let's say, oh my gosh, Ben, if I'm going to use this, that means I have to be archiving all this stuff, right? That's a big bunch of work. It's only going to be going forward. It's no good. But the Wayback Machine has tons and tons of stuff. And with a simple one line of code, you can suck in any URL from the Wayback Machine, stick it into Story Tracker. This image came right out of Story Tracker, just then creates it on the fly. And it could also then parse out all the URLs and do the same type of analysis over a lot of older sites. So you could say, look back over time and say, how has the design of news homepages changed? Is there more links, less links? Do they move faster, move slower? What type of things do they cover or don't cover? Could very easily be done by kind of taking this and pointing at other archives. And that type of thing could potentially be integrated with other sources as well. I just wanted to do this as a demonstration. So you know what's next? This is just some basic open source code. It's an experiment that we're doing together to try to create something that doesn't exist and that doesn't exist today, but it needs feedback from people like you who know this stuff and want it to be and maybe want or don't want things like this, to let me know how we can improve it if we're going to make these efforts. And I think that that's the approach I'd like to take, is how can we grow this type of effort we're making with RJI to make code that does stuff that isn't currently done and integrate it with different things in the world. And the only way that's going to be useful is if we find people to link up with. You know what I mean? Because I was really inspired by the media criticism work that I did in graduate school and that sort of thing. That's kind of the natural partnerships I've had in mind, but I'm open to anything. I'm here just to kind of talk about it. I'm really my next push is to try to integrate this further into past pages. So why can't we be automating the type of analysis we talked about there so that it happens on the fly on a rolling basis in different interesting ways? And I've got a few ideas how that's going to happen in the next couple months. We don't have to just output images. We could output SVG files that would allow more interesting animations or people to do different stuff. The system that detects what's a story or what isn't a story, we've extracted from the library. It's actually an independent library that could be used for a lot of different things. And I think there's some really cool machine learning kind of things we could do to take that to another level. And then any other wild ideas that I hear anybody has, I'm totally open to and I think would be cool. So that's it. That's Story Tracker. It's online today. You can go there. There's full documentation of how to use it as a programmer, including numerous examples of it in use. And yeah, that's it. That's your spiel. So you can feel free to tell me it sucks, or what you think it's useless, or how it could be more useful, or what you just think. I'd love to hear it.
Okay. So, if we can use the mic, please.
Thanks. It looks great. I wonder if, so at the Library of Congress, we collect like election websites from candidates.
Right.
And back to, I don't know, in the late 90s. So I wonder if this could, if this could be useful for analyzing things in those archives. Not that there's really story elements there, but there are different other elements.
Sure. Well, the way it's built, it's agnostic to what type of page is being put in. You know what I mean? Just all the examples and the way I've kind of framed the code have been built around home pages, but the code doesn't care. You could feed it any set of pages, and it could do the exact same stuff.
Great.
Two questions. Have you thought about applying this? I know that reporters always ask, like, how do I figure out a way to track whether this campaign website has changed over what period of time? Have you thought about applying this to that? And the other question was, do you have archives going back to what was going on during Ferguson? Because I was really curious about the way that the news broke, particularly over like St. Louis Today or any of those sorts of things.
Sure.
Since there's this like meme that Twitter is much better at covering like this early breaking news, and I actually thought that the media in St. Louis actually did a pretty good job once this became national news.
Sure. So the campaign question, the first one, I actually hadn't really thought about it, so you guys are asking it now. I think it's totally plausible and you could do it. You just would need to set up the system to begin the archiving, or you'd need to plug in somebody else's archive, which would totally be doable. I just hadn't thought about it. It would work. The Ferguson thing, Past Pages now has 1.7 million screenshots, which is kind of scary. And it includes the whole Ferguson period, the images. I didn't have the Post-Dispatch. I haven't archived that, which is just an oversight of selecting the 100 sites. Because of the limited funds, I have not expanded the number of sites that it archives a whole lot, because every one I add is just going to increase the long-term cost. But the screenshots for all the other major ones are there. HTML archival went online around that same time, but that's only for a smaller subset of the sites. But if you had pages or the things where they're useful, you could very easily do that kind of analysis. You know what I mean? You could identify certain terms, right, or a period of time, and you could analyze what stories were given the most prominence, what terms were used to describe it, what photographs were chosen. You could begin to start doing that type of work using this, and I'd love to make it more and more useful for that kind of thing, because that's the thing I'm really passionate about, is how do we automate media criticism so we can ask bigger and more insightful questions.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly, I think this is super cool because essentially, like, what Google started doing is not just indexing HTML, but actually looking at layout and those sorts of things. So seeing that you've built a framework to start looking at that is actually, I think, way more powerful than I had actually assumed that this was.
Right. And if people are into the gearhead stuff, it's actually using a tool called Selenium. So there's a really awesome software tool that is open source that I just took, which is used to simulate websites for testing it. So if you work at Facebook and you make one minor change, it could break 100 things on the website. So there's these crazy software systems that fire up the site and click all the buttons just to see what's broken. And we're using that same software for like an entirely different purpose here of simulating the page and then pulling out the layout. Yeah.
Ben, have you extended this to the mobile world as well? I mean, since you're getting the style sheets, a lot more people are getting that info, on their phone.
Right. It's totally possible. So Past Pages only takes one screenshot per hour per site, but the HTML, when you open it up, say in the tool Selenium I just described, so I'm going to have a fake browser open it up and render the page, you can set how big the browser is when it opens. So you theoretically could identify a set of viewports, I guess would be the technical term, right? A set of sizes that you wanted the browser to open up at and render it and then compare those, or just do one versus the other. Currently, I just use what supposedly the most common one, 13, whatever. But you could take this and do the exact same thing for any size that you wanted just by tweaking the code.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and other people have thought about this too, is when we're talking about archiving websites, how often, like if you're just going to do a, sort of straightforward, stupid capturing of it, but, in order to save space, you kind of have to be strategic about that.
Correct.
But at the same time, if you have a breaking news story and things are being updated really quickly, you don't want to, you kind of have to figure out, I don't want to miss something really important.
Right.
So how would we...
That's a research question I think you could use this and other tools to answer. You know what I mean? I don't know the answer, but I think if you were harvesting the pages very frequently and then just doing some basic comparisons of the changes, you could pretty quickly identify what the rate of change is for different news sites and then use that to sort of, know that, and that's like an academic finding you could have, but you could use that to try to find an optimal time to change it. Also, there's ways you can do it with computers where you request the page, you compare it to the previous one. If there's no change, just don't save it. Right. You know what I mean? It just kind of opts out of saving it. I think there's compression tricks that I'm not using that I think could probably really reduce the size, where there's tricks for compressing files where you only compress the change from file to file. You don't compress the entire file itself each time, not to get real geeky. that, that some people use and other people don't, that reduces the amount of data necessary to save a series of files, which would be a really cool thing to make easier to do.
Yeah, not like I'd be interested in this at all. Yes. Way to go. So I have a suggestion question, but first I wanted to call you out to the rest of the people here. This is the kind of person and the kind of interesting stuff that we love. And that libraries and other archivists should love and encourage and support and foster and do whatever we can. It's the people who are essentially what we call the middleware people. People who are creating access, enhanced access points and doing something creative with it. And more importantly, he's opening the door for other people to take his code and do something creative with. So the fact that you're here with a superb app is great, but as a symbol for what many people in this audience want done with their archiving and their material, you're even better an example. So I just wanted to suggest another iteration, not for you, but to anybody who contacts you to build off of. There's increasing interest in the personalization of the web, where depending upon your cookie array and geolocation by IP and other kinds of attributes, you see a different web. You see a different news, you see different stories, and you see different ads. And as you know, the Internet Archive's really interested in political ads as well as other ads. And there's a growing interest, it's certainly nascent at the moment, to create essentially kind of a honeypot botnet where there are simulations of computers with different profiles that are constantly hitting up a variety of sites to take these kinds of snapshots and take a look at assessing, quantifying just how different is the web to what the site perceives you to be and to the advertisers perceive you to be. I'm just offering that.
I think it's a great idea. I think it would be a great research question. I don't know the scholarly literature of whether people have, done thorough studies of that or not. But to me, that's the kind of thing I'm excited about, where if there's some partnership where somebody wants to do a study and they just need a little extra programming to kind of like make it happen. You know what I mean? We just need to stick a cookie on this thing and do a loop. The cookie's not there right now. You know what I mean? If we could figure that out, that's the type of thing that I would really love to do as like a next gen or a spin-off of this, so we have sort of a practical project that leads to sort of just enough web development to get it done,
And in the light of ethical considerations, I have to raise the point that the speculation about doing that comes close to what's already being done in a class of click fraud, where people are intentionally hitting up ads with different profiles in order to gain the revenue from those ads. So, like all interesting creative things, there are, with great power comes great responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up. We're a little bit over.